Okay, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Masculinity Unmasked, the fortnightly conversation that delves deep into what it means to be a man in the 21st century. So, the topic of conversation for today's episode is inner peace, breaking free from anxiety and depression. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host and fellow coach, Greg Stein. And this evening, hi Greg, we're lucky enough to be joined by a very experienced integrative psychotherapist and therapeutic counselor, Helen Holmes. So, Helen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Do you want to start by sharing a little bit about yourself and the sort of work that you do for our listeners?
Yeah, of course. So, pleasure to be invited to speak today. I've been working in mental health for 35 years, and that's been with children, adolescents, adults, couples, and families. And so, I'm glad to have had that experience. And it really stemmed from helping set up the big issue where people were street homeless, and sort of
Mm.
committing myself to working with the most vulnerable. And so, for example, I've worked in psychiatric wards for over 20 years. And now, gladly, through training, personal therapy, education, CPD, I'm able to work with the most complex and vulnerable people in private practice.
Wow, great. So you've really sort of seen it all there in your practice, ranging from working in sort of psychiatric institutions, but also that one-to-one private practice work as well. Um,
Yeah,
sounds like you've been doing
that's
some
right.
great stuff. Um,
Yeah, and also always learning. I mean, I think I've seen a lot, and then I meet someone who tells me extraordinary stories about their experiences, which are way outside of what I've learned before. So it's interesting, saddening, exciting,
mm,
and I just want to best equip myself to be able to help the widest population possible,
yeah,
including diversity.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It sounds like you're doing some amazing work, and we'll certainly delve into that. The sort of topic for today is around anxiety and depression, and I think some of our listeners will understand what those terms mean if they're going through anxiety or depression. Maybe they've received that sort of diagnosis. Some of them may be experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression, or some people just, aren't aware. So we'll have a sort of a range in our audience, but it'd be useful to sort of start, I think, by if you wouldn't mind sort of explaining what anxiety and depression is on a psychological level.
Yeah, I think that anxiety can sometimes be an umbrella term for a whole range of feelings. So we
Mm,
could feel anger, but depending on our upbringing, the anger might be most acceptable as anxiety. So anxiety can be an umbrella term, but usually it includes generalized anxiety disorder, which is someone who worries about a range of different themes in their life. It could be social anxiety, which is more specific. It also can include panic or agoraphobia, where someone might fear going out. Um,
mm,
in a more extreme form, perhaps with obsessive compulsive disorder, which has many manifestations, or post traumatic stress disorder. And it can also, anxiety can manifest in body dysmorphia too. And it's a
mm.
normal part of life, I think, and we need it really to tell us about danger, but it can become more problematic when it interferes with our daily life. So we all worry about certain situations, which may, in some normalized way, show that we care. But when it becomes more excessive and persistent, then it can result in intense physical symptoms such as panic and uncontrollable fear about everyday situations, which really hinders someone's life.
Yeah, great. And I'll share my sort of journey with that a little bit later on. Um,
Okay.
just with depression as well, just to sort of um, tick off both of those boxes. So, how would you sort of summarize what depression is then on a psychological level?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that depression is a mood state. So depression's to do with mood, and it causes feelings of sadness that won't go away. And there's a lot of stigma around depression, and it's a serious and but treatable condition, and it affects people of all backgrounds, ages, gender differently. I
Mm,
think. And depression can result in, or can be identified or result in, the body physically slowing down, and it's hard to feel motivated.
Mm,
Um, a person who's suffering with depression can have negative thoughts and feelings of hopelessness and helplessness and not wanting to live, which may result in suicidal ideation or in plans. A person could withdraw from activities and social life, day-to-day responsibilities, and their symptoms can keep them trapped in the cycle of depression, which really is very unpleasant for those people.
mm,
Great answer. Helen, that was a lovely description. We touched on a few things with anxiety and depression before we come on, but I was hoping we could have a deeper dive. And I've got a really big question for you that I'd like you to answer. But before that, the area I want to sort of dive into is anxiety and depression on the rise? I think we all get the impression it is, and even though you're talking about, rates, I think I was reading the other day that 1 in 8 men have depression, but they don't seek help. 30% of men will experience, high levels of anxiety
Mm.
in their lifetime. I have a theory that this leads in quite well to this social comparison theory, where the keeping up with the Joneses idea that, 88% of people compare themselves to others. And actually, a lot of the guys that I work with, they admit that after scrolling on Instagram or social media, that they feel worse. They go on there, they get the dopamine hit. Actually, once that settles, they feel worse because they've been comparing themselves to other people. Do you think that this is on the rise? Do you think it's going to get worse? Do you think there's any other really interesting points or subjects that are impacting on
Yeah.
this?
No, it's a really interesting question, and you've just gone into it quite a lot of detail yourself, which I'm just thinking about. But I think you could say that anxiety is on the rise because there's so much more uncertainty than there was in the past. And so, with changes in roles for men and women, for example, that could be seen as a positive, progressive aspect of life. But on the other hand, it does bring with it a lot of uncertainty, and anxiety is mainly about tolerance of uncertainty, um, especially in generalized anxiety disorder. So I think that with the changes in societal kind of norms, with more choice really being offered to people, that could become overwhelming and people could become more anxious. I think anxiety levels might be different in different age groups. So, for example, people who are older might have stayed in a career for longer, whereas now there's a lot more change, which it can be seen as a positive thing, but change can also bring a lot of anxiety to people. So, I would say overall that there probably is more of a rise in an increase in anxiety, especially amongst young people. And yeah, I was reading that there's 1 in 5 men who suffer with anxiety.
Yeah.
mm,
And but men, I think, unfortunately, probably still have grown up not feeling as if they can talk about their mental health as much as women might do, and
mm.
and mental health difficulties are probably seen as a weakness, a sign of weakness, which of course it's not, because we all have mental health and mental health difficulties at different times of our lives.
Yeah, that,
Helen, that's such a great answer. That's such a great
yeah,
answer, isn't it, Max?
it's so true.
Helen, yeah. No, go on, Max, you go. I'll hand you over.
I was going to say that it's a really interesting conversation that we're getting onto here around that social comparison theory that you brought in, Greg, because and what you've just touched on there around the stigma, Pelham, because that was my experience with all of this as well. And like going back when I was a lawyer, there's a lot of sort of stigma around um, mental health in that profession still now. A lot of lawyers don't want to talk about being stressed. They don't want to talk about being anxious or having depression. But in a lot of high pressure sectors, it's very much like that. And for me, that was a barrier to seeking help when I started to experience anxiety. And I didn't realize how physical symptoms were, but I'd feel like I'm passing out or I was going to drop dead. Um, and I'd have panic attacks regularly. Um, but I'd try and sort of hide all of that away and put on a sort of happy face and not show anybody that was my experience and what was going on, because I just couldn't see anyone else around me that was having the same experience. So I thought I was very much alone with it, and actually that my suffering was a sign of weakness, and that couldn't be revealed. And actually, it's the contrary to that. I think that vulnerability and seeing others suffer and having those conversations with people eventually around their experiences with anxiety was the thing that helped me get the support that I needed. That sort of modeling of vulnerability. But it takes other people to sort of lift off their masks, or for
Yeah.
us to, yeah, be able to, take off our masks as well. And yeah, it was a real sort of journey that I went on. And yeah, it was a challenge. We're talking, yeah, probably about 10 years ago. And yeah, just find the avenue into the support, I think is the interesting point here, because I didn't know where to begin. And I went to the doctor and they just put loads of pills on the table for me, said, right, here we go, off you trot. And I couldn't actually exercise because whenever my heart rate got to a certain point, I'd have a panic attack. And the doctor wasn't very helpful and just said, just go for a run and you'll be all right. Take these meds. And so I had to figure things out myself and go on my whole journey. And I wonder how much of that is a common experience for the men that rock up in your practice, in terms of, that struggle to actually get the support in the first place, let alone do the work.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and thanks for sharing about your situation, which I do have, some legal professionals in my practice, and it takes a long time to get to who they are, and not just lawyers, but maybe there is a kind of, I don't know whether it's a myth or not. I'm still thinking about it.
Mm,
That there's an idea that men do externalize their feelings and females internalize them, but I think with the stigma around masculinity, whatever that means, that men don't cry, for example, which they may have been brought up on, or influenced by peers and
mm,
colleagues as well, that actually I think a lot of men do internalize a lot, and it takes a lot of work, helping them to feel safe and that the situation is confidential, that then men can start to show more of what they're thinking and feeling. Because I
mm,
see a lot of thoughts and feelings being hidden, and that's in terms of a challenge on my part to be patient and to help someone to feel comfortable so that they feel safe enough to
yeah.
be able to talk about what really is going on for them.
Mm,
I completely understand. Max, thank you for diving so deep. I think that's
Yeah.
a great example to set here. And Helen, that was a great answer. I had a similar experience where I was coached myself. And that's the whole reason I'm here. Someone really inspired me when I was rock bottom. And one of the main ways they got me out of that hole, if you like, was to get me to set goals and look forward, thinking about me being the character in my life movie, me being the director of that and how I wanted to move forward. And that lived with me a lot. But I had problems I needed to seek help. So I resonate a lot with what you're saying. And I know lots of the people who are listening this will, if that makes sense as well, which is great. And that brings me into something else. This Max touched on, work-based challenges, but there's lots of common challenges for men. And I think this conditioning to man up is a real
mm,
interesting thing. We touched on a few things, didn't we? That some of the traditional things that men want to talk about are alcohol, drugs, work, but some of these niches are changing, aren't they? There's some really interesting things coming in, gaming, weather, other aspects as well. Um, in your experience, Helen, anything else that you think is going to be changing, maybe with Gen Z, or as we evolve, as we change, as we move forward? Do you think
Yeah,
there's anything else that's gonna pop up?
well, I think that there's more stigma for in terms of depression for men. I mean, I'm just thinking about,
mm,
how that would be easily covered up, a sign of weakness or laziness. Talking about feelings is not done, and
mm,
an idea of being tough, which is unnecessary, obviously. But when you're brought up in that way, then I think that some aspects that probably are affecting men in particular at the moment. There's a lot of kind of one of the main addictions. Well, the main addiction at the moment is internet pornography, where such strong images are affecting people's minds. And having to keep that secret, for example, in many ways, but also perhaps the disorientating experience, I think, for many that I can see can only be inevitably be the case is people who are coming out in terms of LGBTQ plus, and although that's much more talked about, we still need to go a long way for people to feel comfortable in their differences in terms of gender identity and sexual orientation, which I still think is really difficult for maybe particularly men to talk about. Yeah, and I think that other aspects that could be increasing the difficulty for men is, loss of being a provider, because jobs are becoming more difficult to hold down for longer, loss of career, and therefore, loss of self-worth. Perhaps, traditionally, men being considered as the provider, that's a difficult instinct to change, and is passed down through the generations. And perhaps men identify most with their work and they throw their feelings into their work. But when there isn't work there, I think men can very quickly become feeling inadequate and de-skilled, and not admitting to oneself about symptoms and what they may mean in relation to not having people to talk to about what's going on for them.
Yeah, there's so many interesting points in there. Things that I hadn't even considered around, talking about the the diversity that we can experience, and how that can impact the mental health side. That was very much my story as well, around sort of coming to terms with who I was. It's a huge part of it in terms of what led to my anxiety. And yeah, these things aren't talked about. I think we have a man box that we're given when we are kids. Don't express your emotions. Make sure that you act like the other boys and don't be different. And if you sort of break one of those rules, you're cast outside. And that can cause a lot of mental health problems. And it could be that the thing that makes you different is simply that you're now experiencing depression or anxiety. And later down the line, when you're an adult, but there's then no blueprint. You're chucked outside of your mate's circle because that's not then a core topic, or that's not something that the other guys in the group understand. And then you're just having to navigate these choppy waters by yourself. And I think that's what leads to a lot of this isolation, is that men aren't having these conversations. They're not sitting down at the table and talking about these things that we're talking about now. And that's why there's so much need for tribes, essentially. If we look historically and culturally, men always had tribes. They always had initiations, and we've lost that. So, the only sort of tribe that we have is this very limited man box that we're given when we're a kid, that we're expected to subscribe to. But as soon as we're cast out of that, there's no map forward.
It's a really good point, Max, that you're making there. And I think my concern is that still there's such a stigma about talking about suicidal thoughts and suicidal feelings and suicidal plans, where we call it the S word, where especially in high-powered jobs, under stress, even if you're not high-powered in a high-powered job, the stress of money, rent, especially in London or big cities. I think that, and also it's known that suicide is more common amongst men. Where more men complete suicide, whereas more women, attempt suicide, and that how men can become easily, I think, isolated in thinking that they're inadequate, and finding themselves not able to talk to people, when actually, it's so common. It's much more common, I think, that people are feeling suicidal, and for men to remember that they're not the only ones at all. And you could say that men's depression is different to women. Men don't seek help. It's research tells us as much as women, but there's also different coping skills. Men can deny their feelings and symptoms and push feelings down, and they're not socialized to talk about, for example, depression or anxiety. And this could come out in sort of physical symptoms such as headaches and back pain, digestion problems, sexual dysfunction. And there's a lot of shame around talking about these things, especially when someone's confidence and self-worth is low. So I just really want men out there to remember that there are many people, therapists such as myself, who welcome people with suicidal ideation and plans to come and talk about it, because death is so final and everyone's got so much to contribute.
It's a good answer. I just want to touch on something before I drop in a really big question for you. We've talked a lot about change, and you said it yourself, Helen, about men's work circumstances changing, and Max, you touched on, well, there's a really interesting theory that's coming out called the 1,000th monkey theory, and it's all about how we're conditioned, and actually breaking that condition is tough, if that makes sense. And I think that's industrialization, etc. We've been conditioned to be a certain type of person, to work certain hours, to have certain theories, ideologies, and that's changing rapidly. And I think our ability to change with it is not as fast as how fast the world is changing. And that's maybe why we're getting some of these problems. I'm definitely not qualified to touch on that, but I definitely encourage people to look at that theory as fascinating. And it's all about conditioning. What I think we do in every session, in every one of these podcasts, is to get some real take homes for our listeners, for our clients. For me, it's all about journaling in channeling, to get these, to get over anxiety and depression. But I'd love to know some expert advice. If you were going to talk to one of our clients or some of the people that listen, what's some real take homes for them? What's some great advice?
Well, so I often have these conversations, and so some strategies, tools for anxiety and depression. So the most important one, which isn't as easy as it sounds, is to develop a routine in your life, so that you get up at a certain time, you go to bed at a certain time, and you regularly eat 3 meals, 2 to 3 snacks, regular fluids, exercise, spending time away from screens, and working hard to sleep. So that's the most important. I can't emphasize that enough. And that might take quite a while, to get into a routine with all those aspects. And another aspect that could well be in that routine is socializing, taking walks in the park, fresh air, and having a timetable of a variety of activities, so we can easily get drawn into work situations where we're glued to the screen. But I think that we need to have a variety of activities to maintain our good balance of mental health, and also relaxation, focusing on other things apart from worries, and helping, we can actually take control and calm ourselves, and then we can think more clearly. And also, we can do this through online mindfulness or, in-person classes. Also, I think it's really important to self-soothe, because we're living in quite a harsh, hard world with a lot of changes, and we're exposed on the news to, quite traumatic experiences. So I think there is definitely a need for self-soothing, especially amongst men who may not kind of feel au fait with the idea of self-soothing, but like hugging a teddy bear gives one comfort because of the warmth of that, but also holding soft material, but mainly treating ourselves and doing things that we enjoy so that we feel good. I mean, we could do yoga, there's qigong, tai chi, meditation, and many other kind of ways of relaxing. We can develop a playlist of music, lay on the bed and just listen to music and zone out for a while. We can walk in the park. I was saying, seeing green, connecting with people, having conversations just about light-hearted subjects, or even, sharing with someone who you trust. And obviously, I'm going to promote psychotherapy, because I do think, from my own experience of having entered into therapy, it really kind of transformed my life. Just having somebody listen to what I was saying about my family issues, and then seeing ways forward was just transformatory. And having a safe confidential space where the therapist is, not linked to any part of the person's life, means that it's very containing. And once the person starts to settle into therapy, then when they have a difficult time outside of therapy, they know that they've got a place where they can take that, and that just calms the person down as well. I mean, there's many more strategies and tools that I can give to you, but yeah, those are some of them.
That's really, really
Great, Helen.
helpful. And
Helen, I do have one question before we pass people on. Tell me, what is Qigong? I've never heard
Okay,
of that. I'm
so
interested to know what that is.
yeah. Well, qigong is a Chinese practice, and it originated with for older people to keep moving. But actually, it's quite rare to find qigong teachers in the UK, but they are excellent, and really it helps
I'm gonna check that
people of
out.
all ages to breathe and to move at the same time. And it does sound easy, but actually it's these exercises that Qigong masters teach people, if they're interested, are very, very strenuous. And the outcome actually is that you get to know your body intimately. And with breathing, it releases quite a lot of feelings. So it's quite intense in some ways.
Excellent.
mm,
Excellent. Really, really,
yeah,
really interesting. Max, I'll leave it to you. What a fantastic insight, Helen. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciated that. And I know our listeners will definitely will do as well.
yeah. It's a
Thank you.
practice I've given a go before, and it is a good one. And just yeah, just picking up some of those points that you said there, Helen, around the tools and strategies, just from my own experience, those things were critical. Absolutely, the routine, the exercise. Eventually, when I was able to do it, and I think a lot of the time when we're in the depths, when we're at the bottom of that well, it can feel like we can't exercise, we can't build a routine, we can't do any of this stuff. But there are ways that we can show up just by putting one foot in front of the other, and that can build momentum over time. So it could just be changing one small thing, and those small things do compound. And the thing that really was important for me was actually just understanding what the hell was going on. When it first happened, for me, I just felt a bit off. That's how it started. And then when the physical symptoms got worse and worse and worse, I thought this can't be something mental. It can't be anxiety because it's so incredibly physical. There's something critically wrong with me. And it wasn't until I sat down with somebody who did CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and they said that most of your symptoms are coming from hyperventilation. It's just about regulating your breathing. And I was like, no, that's rubbish. It can't be. They're so physical. I feel like I'm going to die. They're like, no, but that's what it is. And actually, what they did with me, which was really alternative, but they hyperventilated with me. We
Yeah,
both hyperventilated at the same time, and nothing happened. I didn't drop down dead. And I realized from that point onwards, wow, how much of all of my symptoms was just linked to my breathing. And that's how one thing, that's why I'm really invested in breathing, because there's so much power in it. Once we have a dysregulated nervous system, a lot of that stems from the breathing. So understanding what the hell is going on, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, a lot of these things you talked about this earlier with headaches, digestion, it can feel very physical, but more often than not, it's not. The brain and the body are interlinked. So
yeah,
speaking to the expert like yourself, going to a therapist, whether that's a counselor that you're downloading to, whether that's a psychotherapist, CBT, whatever it is, have that person in your corner who's going to support you. But also friends, find confidence that you can download to in your personal life as well. Those things are really, really critical for
yeah.
me.
Yeah,
I found.
yeah. And I think, a therapist or someone, a friend or family member, as long as they're objective enough, can help normalize a lot of what's
Mm,
kind of become exaggerated in our minds. And so I think communicating to a trusted person, is a really good move forward.
yeah,
Excellent.
fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much, Greg, and thank you so much, Helen, for taking the time to come and speak to us and delving into this topic. It's been great to hear
Excellent.
your thoughts. And thanks everyone for listening. We hope that you found this conversation useful. Helen, if people would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, so they can get in touch with me by email, which is HelenHolmes009 at gmail.com. I've got a website which is www.helenholmespsychologist.com, and that's probably the best way. Or just email me, and very welcome to contact me.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that. And if anyone listening resonates with the topic, we've talked about some quite powerful stuff today, impactful stuff. Please do let us know. And if you need any further support, we can signpost you to relevant people that specialize in these areas, like Helen. And in our next session, our next conversation, we're going to be looking on the 2nd of March at owning your identity online, the art of personal branding for entrepreneurs with Daniel Williams, who works in DTG marketing. So another really interesting conversation, very different to the one that we've had today, but another important one. So thanks again, Helen. Thanks, Greg, and take care, everyone.
Thank you.